What if I told you that one of the most heavily defended regions in the world, fortified with layers of missile batteries, radar stations, and electronic warfare systems, just fell prey to swarms of small, relatively cheap drones? And what if this defeat didn't happen on some remote battlefield, but in Crimea, the jewel of Vladimir Putin's empire, the territory he once promised would never fall? That's exactly what has just unfolded in the summer of 2025. A season that Russia expected would cement its dominance in Ukraine has instead turned into one of its most humiliating failures since the beginning of the war. And the world is now watching as Ukraine, against all odds, dismantles what Moscow once claimed was impenetrable. Let's break this down. When Russia annexed Crimea back in 2014, it wasn't just about land. It was about pride, power, and projecting the image that Putin could rewrite borders at will. The Kremlin turned Crimea into a fortress, pouring in billions to reinforce it with some of Russia's most advanced air defense systems. The S-300 and S-400 missile batteries, advertised by Moscow as being able to shoot down almost anything, were deployed in dense clusters across the peninsula. Russian officials even bragged that Crimea was more heavily defended than most of Russia itself. By May of this year, Russian media were still boasting about how safe the skies over Crimea had become. A Navy spokesman told Defense Express that Crimea's defenses were denser than in many parts of Russia, insisting that Ukraine would never be able to penetrate. Russian partisans even conducted surveillance exercises to reassure Moscow that its airspace was secure. But then reality hit. In late August, over the span of just a few days, Ukrainian intelligence and special operations units launched a coordinated wave of drone attacks that tore through Crimea's supposedly airtight defenses. These weren't just symbolic strikes. Ukraine deliberately targeted the very systems meant to stop them, the S-300S and S-400S themselves. Using precision-guided drones, Kiev's forces struck radar installations, command posts, and the launchers of those vaunted anti-air batteries. The results were devastating. Almost overnight, large sections of Crimea's shield collapsed. Videos began circulating of fireballs lighting up the night sky, the silhouettes of destroyed launchers burning in the distance. For ordinary Russians, it was a shock. For Putin, it was a nightmare. The message was unmistakable. Ukraine could hit Crimea whenever it wanted, and there was nothing Russia could do to stop it. Now here's where the story gets even more humiliating for Moscow. Crimea isn't just a piece of land, it's a symbol. Putin has repeatedly called it sacred, a core part of Russian identity. He staged parades there, built new infrastructure, and promised the Russian public that it would never again fall under foreign control. To see it now, vulnerable and burning under waves of Ukrainian drones, strikes at the heart of that narrative. But beyond symbolism, Crimea also has cold, hard strategic value. It's the hub for Russia's Black Sea Fleet, the staging ground for supply lines into southern Ukraine, and a launch pad for missile strikes deeper into Ukrainian territory. Weakening Crimea's defenses isn't just a morale victory. It directly undermines Russia's ability to sustain its war effort, and remember, this was supposed to be Russia's big summer. Tens of thousands of troops were massed along the front lines in the Sumy and Pokrovsk regions. State media hyped up the coming offensive as the push that would finally break Ukraine's resistance. Pro-Russian analysts promised sweeping territorial gains and a demoralized Ukrainian army. But instead, the offensive stalled almost immediately. Russia gained almost nothing while suffering enormous losses. The collapse of Crimea's defenses is the final nail in the coffin of that grand plan. Instead of breaking Ukraine, it is Russia that is now on the defensive, scrambling to replace destroyed missile systems, rushing reinforcements into Crimea, and trying desperately to convince its own citizens that the situation is under control. So what went wrong? Part of the answer lies in technology, but an even bigger part lies in adaptability. Ukraine has mastered the art of drone warfare. While Russia invested billions in static defense systems, Ukraine poured resources into innovation, smaller, cheaper, smarter drones that could swarm, evade, and overwhelm. And here's the key. Drones don't need to destroy an entire system to make it useless. A single strike on a radar array or a command post can blind an entire battery. It's David versus Goliath, but in this case, David doesn't just have a slingshot. He has thousands of them, flying, buzzing, and striking from every angle. And here's what the mainstream media often leaves out. This isn't just about military technology. It's about how a smaller nation can use creativity and resilience to outmaneuver a larger aggressor. History gives us examples. Think back to the Vietnam War, where the U.S., with overwhelming firepower, still couldn't defeat guerrilla tactics. Or Afghanistan, where both the Soviet Union and later the United States were bogged down by fighters who adapted faster than conventional armies. Crimea is becoming Putin's Afghanistan in miniature, a place he thought was secure, a place he believed symbolized strength, now turning into a showcase of weakness. And let's be clear, the humiliation isn't just on the battlefield, it's political. Putin built much of his legitimacy at home on the promise that Russia was rising again, that its military was unstoppable, and that territories like Crimea were forever Russian. But every Ukrainian drone strike chips away at that illusion. Every fireball in the Crimean night sky reminds Russians that their government can't actually protect them. Think about the psychology of this. If Crimea, fortified, defended, and supposedly untouchable, can be struck repeatedly, what does that say about the safety of Moscow itself, about St. Petersburg, about the entire Russian homeland? Of course, Russia will respond. It always does. More air defenses will be rushed to Crimea, more propaganda will be broadcast about the invincibility of Russian forces, and more brutal strikes will be launched against Ukrainian cities in retaliation. But the cycle is becoming obvious. Russia reacts, Ukraine adapts, Russia builds, Ukraine destroys. It's a war of attrition, not just in soldiers and weapons, but in credibility. And right now, Russia's credibility is in free fall. Here's another layer to consider: the global implications. For years, countries around the world have purchased Russian air defense systems, believing the hype that they were among the best in the world. The S-400 was marketed as the crown jewel, a rival even to American Patriot systems. But if a country like Ukraine, with limited resources, can repeatedly knock them out with drones, what does that say to nations like India or Turkey that spent billions on them? The myth of Russian military superiority is being dismantled in real time, not just in the eyes of Ukraine, but in the eyes of the entire international arms market. And that has consequences far beyond this war. Now let's zoom back in. In the short term, what does this mean for the battlefield? The answer is simple: vulnerability. Every destroyed radar, every burned-out missile battery makes it easier for Ukraine to strike again. Supply depots, fuel reserves, command posts, even the Black Sea Fleet itself, all are now at greater risk. And the more Ukraine can hit Crimea, the more it can disrupt Russia's operations across southern Ukraine. But in the long term, this is about something bigger. It's about proving that aggression doesn't guarantee victory, that even a nuclear-armed superpower, with all its boasts and bluster, can be brought to its knees by innovation, persistence, and the will to resist. So let me ask you, if Crimea, Putin's pride, his fortress, his so-called sacred land, can be breached and humiliated this way, what does that mean for the future of his war? What does that mean for Russia's place in the world order? Because here's the truth the Kremlin doesn't want to admit. The summer of 2025 was supposed to be Russia's moment of triumph. Instead, it has turned into a season of humiliation, a summer of collapse. And while Russia will keep pushing, as it always does, the cracks in its empire are spreading wider every day. Ukraine has shown that no matter how many tanks, missiles, or soldiers Russia throws at the problem, ingenuity and determination can still prevail. And that's the real story here, not just about Crimea, not just about drones, but about the idea that power is never absolute, and that even the mightiest empires can falter when confronted with relentless resistance. So, what do you think? Has Ukraine just rewritten the playbook for modern warfare? Or is Russia about to unleash something even more devastating in response? Let us know your thoughts in the comments. And if you want to keep following how this story unfolds, the battles, the strategies, the victories, and the failures, make sure to subscribe to the Military Show, because this war is far from over, and the next chapter may be even more explosive.